like I'm drunk or anything. I'm not drunk. I'm just tired. There's no silly questions. If you want to interject at any time, just to ask any questions, then please do feel free to stick your hand up or whatever. If I just ask Tracy just to keep an eye on that, because I'm not the most observant.
Yeah, will do. Yeah.
Likewise, if you want to put anything in the chat bar at the side, I'll try and address that as we go along as well. So yeah, I'll crack on. So I have worked in the area of safeguarding now for about 2 years. Previous to that, I was in drugs and serious organised crime. Came into internet child abuse, and we sit in the same arena as rape, serious sexual assaults, harassment, and essentially child protection. So we're all in the same stream. So whilst my day-to-day is not dealing with serious sexual assaults in this sense, it kind of fits in with the stream of work that we do on a day-to-day basis. Work out if I can share my screen. Right, can everybody see that? Janet, I don't know. Tracy, if you can see that.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Nick. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. Trying to find my. I can actually move through it. So, yeah, rape, serious sexual assaults. There's a lot to this topic. And I've got 25 minutes this morning, so I am going to whip through it. All I would say is, if there's something I don't cover or there's something more specific you want, my contact details are on the last slide. I'll circulate these slides, and please do feel free to contact me anytime if you've just got an inquiry about something or just a question. Like I said, there's no silly questions, but I'll probably struggle to cover all the topic and all your questions in the time. So start off, that's a list of everything that would constitute being a serious sexual offence. So they're covered by the Sexual Offences Act 2003. Top three there are obviously the most serious: rape under Section 1, sexual assault by penetration, Section 2, and then sexual touching under Section 3. And then there's a multitude of other offences which fall onto that, and some of those fall into my remit on the Internet Child Abuse team, specifically things like sexual activity with a child, engaging in sexual activity in the presence of a child, and these are probably things that will be pertinent to you guys from your educational backgrounds. I'm not going to go through every single one of those. Like I say, I'll circulate these so you've got them as a point of reference, but it just gives you a flavour really of what the police would deem to be a serious sexual assault. So, reporting process. The most important thing is that it is reported to the police. I know you've got your safeguarding mechanisms within schools, dedicated safeguarding officers. That is really important that at the first opportunity, the report is made to the police, because we can, as soon as we know about it, we can react to it. And we can obviously safeguard victims, we can deal with suspects, and we can try and obtain best evidence. The longer that we don't know about a report, the longer the less likely we are to obtain that evidence, specifically around forensics and that sort of thing. So reporting mechanisms I'll go through in a bit more detail in a couple of slides, but essentially, if you've got any safeguarding concern whatsoever, don't hesitate to ring 999. There's an online reporting system, and I think most of you have probably got a direct route into the MASH, which, if you don't use any of the other routes, please do feel free to use that, and we can kind of work backwards from there. So yeah, report is made to police through one of those mechanisms. We'll attend and take an initial account. What we won't do is start interviewing children. So if we came to a school, we'd find out what had gone on, but we won't start interviewing children. That needs to be done in the right setting, usually by an ABE process, which is achieving best evidence. That's a video recorded interview in a controlled environment by specially trained officers. So if we do turn up and we don't seem to, we don't take statements and that sort of thing, it's not because we won't, it's because that's not the correct process and it's not the right way to deal with children. Child victims, like I said, they would automatically be subject to urgent MASH referral. If that doesn't come from your side, that would come from our side. And that would trigger a strategy meeting and then a Section 47 visit, which is a joint visit between the police and social care. and that would be done based on how the MASH assess the risk in the situation. So there's what they call a brag process in the MASH, which starts with a blue, a green, amber, and then a red. If it's amber or red, that will trigger an almost immediate strategy meeting, and usually an urgent visit out into the community to speak to victims and that sort of thing. AB interviews, like I said, I touched on that very briefly before. That is a specialist process. It should only be done by specialist trained officers. And the idea of it is that you put people in an environment where they feel comfortable, and that we will achieve the best evidence, because we'll take them through what has or hasn't happened in a really structured and supportive way, rather than sort of going through it on a statement with them where they could feel a bit under pressure or or forget things. If we can identify a suspect, that's obviously key as early as possible, and that comes back to what I was saying about obtaining forensic evidence. Sometimes we use early evidence kits, and we do that in line with forensic windows, which are usually between 48 and 72 hours. After that time, we start losing evidence, and again, that depends on what the sort of offence is, whether it's a penetrative offence and whether it's an assault by touching, that sort of thing. We've obviously then got various powers which would allow us to deal with the suspect. So the suspect might be arrested. If it's child on child, then we obviously need to be aware of what the circumstances are. Is it, and I use the word consensual in its purest form, in that if it's a consensual relationship, obviously children can't consent to have sex by virtue of the fact that they're children. But if it's a consensual relationship, that's a very different scenario to whether it's a non-consensual rape or serious sexual assault. When people are arrested, though, I say obviously juveniles are subject to the same provisions as everybody else. So if there's a safeguarding risk, or we need to obtain evidence by means of searches and that sort of thing, then arrest is still an open line that we can follow. And then what would follow that would be forensic submissions. So that isn't necessarily just swabs. So we might use an early evidence kit, which would have things like a urine sample, hand swabs, nail swabs, sometimes a hair, a piece of hair. But it might also be things like bed sheets, underwear, outer clothing, if there's been a contact with that. If it's a rape and there's an opportunity to get samples of semen and that sort of thing from clothing, they would be submitted for forensic analysis. And then once those returns are received, the investigation would eventually find its way to CPS. Like I say, that's a really, really kind of generic overview of how it would work. Each case is different, and like I say, if it's child on child, that's quite a different scenario to whether it's adult on child or adult on adult. But I think if you've got specific examples that you need me to need some advice on them, please, like I say, feel free to get in touch. So just a bit vaguely about what you can expect if you do report an assault to the police. And I say this from a perspective of obviously your safeguarding capacities. This is what you need to disseminate to your children and victims. If you do decide to report it to police, then it usually won't be a uniformed police officer that will turn up. It would be somebody from one of our safeguarding houses. So we have Conifer House in the south in Ipswich, Rowan House in the west in Bury St Edmunds, and the Birches at Lowestoft. They're where our safeguarding investigation units sit, and they are the officers that will respond to any allegation of serious sexual assault or a rape. Unless there's an immediate, so if it was a stranger rape in a town centre, obviously a uniform officer would attend in the first instance, but they'd be quickly backed up by those specialist officers so that they can kind of take over and start the safeguarding of the victim. They'll talk to the victim, they'll try and reassure them and just talk them through the process of making that report. Obviously, we're there to investigate and to safeguard. We'll never force people into making a report or a disclosure, but we're there to support people who do want to do that. If something is reported to us, but the victim chooses not to progress with it or support an investigation still recorded, and we still go through all the points that I've raised and we'll cover going forward. It just may not make it through the criminal justice process, but that's something we would support the victim through. And again, I think there's an input later from an ISVA, and that's something that they would help support with. We'll investigate the assault. We'll be offered a forensic medical examination at the SARC. Again, that's going to be covered in a later presentation, I think, so I won't go into that now too much. And then you'll either be asked to make a statement, like I say, depending on what the level of the assault is, or an ABE interview, which is essentially just a video recorded statement, or a VRI, as we call it. So, like I say, fast forward a long time here, but the police will then pass our findings, including the forensic reports to the Crown Prosecution Service, and they'll decide whether the case should go to trial, i.e. whether it meets the threshold test, really. Forensic windows, they are really important. So within 72 hours or 48 hours for oral offences. We do have an opportunity for 7 days sometimes, which is what we call a forensically live rape, but that is for penetrative offences. And the longer it goes on, the less likely we are to obtain that evidence. But so just really hammering in that point of the sooner we know about it, the sooner we can do something about it, and the sooner we can hopefully gather the evidence that will get a prosecution home. And point at the bottom there as well, a sexual assault forensic exam that can reveal other forms of evidence beyond this time frame, and that can be useful if we decide to report it. So it might be that we take forensic sample, a victim doesn't want to support an allegation, they might, but we'd be called, we'll turn up, we might still do the examination, and they decide they don't want to support the investigation. If we've obtained those forensic opportunities, then it means that we can reopen that at any time. We've got those, we can preserve them. And should the victim feel like in a few weeks, months, or even years' time, and that they're in a place where they do want to progress with the prosecution, we've obtained that evidence. So it's kind of a halfway house, I guess, between being supportive of the prosecution or not. I think these are the in the advent of and there's another presentation that I'd probably welcome the opportunity to give you at some point around sort of my world in online safeguarding and internet child abuse and that sort of thing, really. I think the advent of social media and just online chat rooms and that sort of thing in general, and the accessibility of pornography have made the lines about sexual assaults and things like that really blurry. And I think a lot of children don't really know what is or isn't acceptable. The bottom line is any sexual contact without your consent is a sexual assault and is therefore a crime. And that's the message that we really need to hammer into children, that if you don't consent and you can't consent, then it is a crime and we need to know about it. Say there's a sliding scale there of two 15-year-olds who are boyfriend and girlfriend is very different to a 17-year-old and a 12-year-old, for example, which is a job that we've got in our office currently. And it needs, every time we need to assess the evidence and see what the best way of investigating that, really, and the most proportionate outcome. We're not here to criminalise children. I think that's another really key message that I want to get across today. We are not here to criminalise children, but what we are here to do is to safeguard children and to educate children. And I know there's somebody, I think Janet's going to do a presentation on the harmful sexual behaviour team at Suffolk County Council, who are an absolutely brilliant resource, and I'd encourage you all to utilise their skills. It's something that we've done on the Internet Child Abuse team. We've started diverting a lot of our investigations to them for educational interventions rather than, like I say, putting children through the criminal justice process, essentially. Rape and serious sexual assault are obviously slightly different kettle of fish in that the magnitude of those offences. Rape is one down from murder, essentially, in police speak, and that wouldn't obviously be a suitable for that sort of diversion. But lower level assaults and sort of consensual relationships which have resulted in pictures being shared and that sort of thing certainly would be suitable for that sort of intervention. So again, please utilise their skills and utilise our team as well if you've got any questions. I'm here to answer those. So sorry, slightly off topic there. If you choose to support police investigation, you'll be supported every step along the way. Like I said, there's ISVAs, independent sexual violence workers, who will support you through that. The OIC, the officer in the case, would support any victim through the process as well, and that's from initial reporting to providing that ABE interview right the way through to the court process if it goes that far. So I'll just sort of implore you really to, if you're in receipt of allegations from children that you really have at home, that the police are there to help. We're not there to hinder. We are there to help, and we will do everything we can to safeguard children and to try and stop whatever's happened to not happening to someone else. Just a bit there about historic assaults and that sort of thing. I'm aware that you guys are at the sharp end of day-to-day interaction with children, and it might be that historic assaults and issues at home, things like that, it come out in the forums that you work in. It's really important that we know about those assaults as well, even if they don't want to support police action or something like that. They need to be recorded because we don't know what we don't know, and it quite often will, if we are recording investigations, we can see a pattern emerging because lightning doesn't strike twice, for want of a better phrase. And if we don't know, we can't deal with it. If we do know, and even if someone's not supportive, or we can use it as intelligence, it just helps us to safeguard children. Like I say, stop things happening to other people, hopefully. Again, if you don't feel ready to go to the police, there's a sexual assault referral centre, and people can self-refer to those. I won't cover that in too much because, again, I think there's somebody who's going to cover that in a later presentation. If I'm going too fast, too slow or anything, or anyone can't hear me because I've got a sore throat, please do just shout or type some abuse in the chat bar. Not too precious. And again, that's just kind of a leading on from what I said before, really. The key message here is that it's about safeguarding, and our #1 priority is to safeguard that child. And that's why we have those Section 47 visits, and we have the immediate interventions that are designed to do that. We can do that in various settings. So we had a job recently where I was in receipt of a referral from the National Crime Agency, where a male had been talking to a female online and suggested it, and they'd been discussing live child abuse, i.e. he was directing her to abuse her children. So that he was based in Suffolk, she was based in Hampshire, and we liaised with Hampshire, and I think within 3 hours both people were in custody. That was within 3 hours of me getting that referral. So we are reactive, and just need to say we don't know what we don't know. So there is no silly questions, and there's no, oh, am I wasting their time? If in doubt, let us know, and then we can respond accordingly. Again, there's things like identify the immediate medical needs. Victims, in my experience, will play things down, and that goes for children probably more than adults. Children don't understand the magnitude sometimes of these offences, and they will play it down, and perpetrators can be quite manipulative, which can lead to children not realising that what's happening is not right. And I think it's really important that we can kind of get into the psyche of the child and understand what has actually happened, and try and support them through it, but also we can understand the magnitude of what's going on and the impact it can have on them for the rest of their lives. And I think the other points on there are really sort of self-explanatory, just that we're here to support. We're not here to persecute people, and we're not here to upset or anything like that. We are here purely to support victims through criminal justice process at whatever level that might be. I think the other point I would just make there quickly at the bottom there is that, and probably leads off from the thing I said about children and not really understanding the magnitude of the offences. We see a lot of rape and sexual offences in intimate and ex-intimate partner relationships, and they can quite often be a sign of a wider issue of domestic violence or a pattern of coercive and controlling behaviour. Things like social media and chat apps and mobile phones and that sort of thing have made that far, far easier for people to manipulate people. And even with child-on-child offences, that behaviour of kind of the grooming behaviour, or the making people do things that they perhaps don't want to do. The debate about consent is long and a long and winding road, but at its purest form, it's really clear. if you're doing something that you wouldn't necessarily want to do, then you probably haven't given your consent, and we need to know about that. And I think that bottom point that I've highlighted in red there, again, I know I hammer the point about safeguarding, but many victims under the age of 18, they are children. People can have consensual sex at the age of 16, but they're still a child until they're 18. And it's really incumbent on us to deal with them in line with that working together to safeguard children guidance, and that we investigate it as child abuse and not anything else really. So the emphasis is on the child. How to report, I think I've covered most of that really. Like I say, 999 if it's urgent, 101 if it's not as urgent. Online is probably as efficient as the 101 service, I would say. There's an online chat function on our website now, the Suffolk Constabulary website. So I think in the absence of an immediate urgency or safeguarding risk, that's, like I say, that's as good as the 101 service. Or, like I say, you can self-refer via a SARC, but I won't steal the next presenter's thunder. Again, there, I think that's probably going to be covered in later the presentation, so I won't cover what the SARC do, but again, I'll forward this round just so you've got an overview. And likewise, the independent sexual violence advisors, absolutely incredible resource, and so important to supporting victims and also supporting sort of prosecutions and that sort of thing. The key word in there is that they're independent, and I think if there's any kind of ambiguity around the police's role, that independent thing is really, really important to kind of foster trust and confidence with victims. So yeah, again, great service and something that we should all probably lean on. The next slide, I don't think you're going to be able to read, I'll be honest. It's a flowchart of serious sexual offences and crime classifications and what would constitute certain offences. I put that in there really from a circulation perspective, just because if you're not quite sure, that's a really good way of working out what you're dealing with. Some of it's common sense, some of it there's some nuances within the Sexual Offences Act, and that's why I've put that in there. So apologies if you can't read it today, but as I say, we'll forward this round, and if there's anything that isn't clear, please do get in touch. Right, so I'm really conscious I'm whipping through this. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask at this point before I move on to the next section?
Yeah, sorry. My name is Oyinza Ogunkede, and I'm a consultant social worker working with children's services. Sorry, the only question I want to ask is, you said that if people are not ready to go to police, SARC provide medical care and support and can also gather forensic evidence. I just want to check with you, because from my experience, when we make referral to SARC, they always ask us whether there are police involvement before they kind of just take referrals from us.
Yeah, and again, I think probably the representative from the SARC will probably be a better place to answer that. But
okay,
I think that probably the reason they ask that is more so they know they can work with us if we are involved, or likewise if the victim doesn't want police involvement, that we're not involved, if that makes sense. I think that's probably the reason that question is asked, because we can't force people to make a complaint to police, make a criminal complaint of an offence being made. But I think the idea really of that whole process is that just because you don't want to report it to the police, or you don't want to instigate a criminal investigation, shouldn't mean that you're not supported. And it's also about that achieving best evidence, like I said, to secure and preserve evidence. So if later down the line, I think after an offence has happened, it's really, really raw for people. And sometimes you need the dust to settle on that before they can kind of see the wood for the trees. And that's what I'm saying about gathering that evidence early at point A, so that at point B, when they've perhaps had time to think about it and process what's happened, that we're then in a position that we can still investigate. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not really, but
Nick, it's Michelle Stouffer here. Sorry to interrupt. I'm County Safeguarding Manager for Children and Young People's Services for this area.
oh, yeah.
I just wanted to say, and I do know, because obviously you're talking very much about working together, but you know, children's services and children's legislation, we work on not only actual harm but the risk of harm.
Yeah.
So if it means that obviously for whatever reason police are unable to progress this further, that's not to say that the local authority won't. They will still be able to make protective decisions around children, even if a police investigation is not able to go any further, or indeed the CPS aren't able to make a decision. So I think that's really vital. The only other thing
I should have covered that really.
That's all right, Nick. The only other thing I wanted to add is about that referral process to the MASH, that sometimes, and more increasingly at various times of the year, and it will be obvious because it's in the holiday season normally, that actually we get more and more cases where we've got multiple victims, which is still child on child abuse. And in those situations, MASH won't make the decision. They refer it straight away for us to do a complex strat. And then what we will do is ask key professionals who are involved with those children to come to that meeting, because actually that's about a coordinated response with our police colleagues, because often you could be looking at multiple victims. So it's absolutely vital that everybody knows what the other person is doing. So we do often and increasingly end up making the threshold decision for these cases at complex strats, purely because we may have multiple children involved.
Yeah,
that's all I wanted to add. Thanks.
No, they're really valid points, and I say unfortunately when I'm whipping through it, I think things can get lost. So that's really, thanks ever so much for adding that. Really, that is across the board, and like I say, for my role in the internet child abuse team, that's the same sort of thing really. If we're not working together, I think we're all pushing water uphill, and that working together to safeguard children policy is really, really important.
You know, just reflecting about.
I'm not sure if is that someone asking a question, or is that someone's just.
No, I think someone's got their mic on actually, Nick.
That's fine. Like I say, guys, this is not an exhaustive presentation at all. I think if there's anyone who wants to have a wider conversation, like I say, my details will be on the last slide. I know Tracy's got them, and I'm happy for you to circulate those. So please do just get in touch, and I'll quite happily sort of have a wider conversation. But I think that point about working together, that again, that's, you know, along with the voice of the child and things like that, is really, really key. So if we try and do things on our own, it's like pushing water uphill. Right, I'm just going to whip through this. This is obviously
Nick, can I just ask a question, if that's all right? Is Val Howard?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, I did put my hand up. I thought I'd remain silent.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I'm trying to juggle looking at my slides and looking at the chat bar and everything, so apologies.
No, that's all right. Let me give you a case scenario. So the child's 15 or 14. She's taken away overseas to be married. She's married on her 15th birthday. She's raped by the husband. What would you be wanting to do when she returned to the country if she's made an allegation?
Well, we need to speak to her. She's made an allegation. Obviously, her safeguarding is going to be the absolute key priority in that situation, and seeing what we can do to liaise with international partners about, you know, locating and identifying the suspect. I'll be honest, Val, I know that's your area of expertise. I haven't dealt with that sort of scenario very often, or at all. So I think it's probably for a wider conversation outside of this forum, just so I don't.
No, that's all right. I'm just doing a practice case review, safeguarding case review at the moment. It's for another local authority, but it was that scenario. So it, you know, one of the failings was came into the MASH. It was a single agency visit initially. No sort of forensics or anything was taken during that time. It wasn't actually investigated as a rape, and it wasn't really investigated as a forced marriage case. So
wow. I mean, I say I don't deal with those, but I think my first go-tos would be absolute deal with that as any other forensically live rape, and like you say, forced marriage. All those offences need to be considered, and her safeguarding should have been absolutely paramount there, and that includes the forensic captures and everything like that, I would say. Otherwise, we lose the best opportunity of obtaining a prosecution. But
very sad case. I mean, the parents were arrested, but I mean, she's 16 in foster placement now, so.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to talk to you about that, actually, Val, because that's is a fascinating area and certainly something that should trigger probably the highest level response, up there with stranger rape and that sort of thing, I would say, because the level of kind of domestic violence as a backdrop to that is fairly huge, isn't it?
No, definitely. I'll put my email in the chat box for you.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, okay, thanks, Val.
Okay, Nick, we've got questions from Austin. Austin, do you want to ask?
Yeah, I have put the
Yeah.
question. This is just for our professionals who are not in social care. I'm in the social care business, and oftentimes we get quite a lot of referrals from schools, but or other professionals, but not a lot of information. You know something has happened. You know the child has said something, but the professional has been very uncomfortable with asking more information, and oftentimes they are what they say to us. We have been told not to ask leading questions. We have been told not to ask more questions. You know, our job is just to report it. And sometimes there is a lot of time lost between trying to get hold of that child, tracking that child. I think just some more information, especially for those of us who are not, for people here who are not in the social care business, how much information and what relevant information can they get from a child when that child is at the initial stage of reporting what has happened to them.
I think so. From a police perspective, obviously that's the point of the achieving best evidence, the ABE process, is that we try to put them in an environment where we can obtain the most information, the best information, and and put them at ease to try and talk about that. The bottom line is, from a policing perspective, is we can't force children to talk about things they don't want to talk about. But I think building that trust and confidence is absolutely key to that. Absolutely right. You can't ask leading questions, and we can't really in that regard either. But yeah, it's a really difficult one, and I know that if children don't want to engage, if something comes to light via a third party and that sort of thing. But I think it's really important to work with parents as well, where they're not directly involved. Again, slightly off topic, but from an internet child abuse position, we tend to find that even the most anti-police, the most hostile parents are really, really supportive if we go in at the right level. And that's what I was saying a little bit about things like the harmful sexual behaviour team. Their interventions are really timely and really important. And I think if you're struggling to get that rapport, sometimes maybe just try somebody else, or get them into a situation where they might feel a bit more relaxed. Okay. Right, has anyone got anything else before? And if not, I'll move on just to the stalking and harassment bits. And like I say, I think this is a huge topic, and I could quite happily sit here all day discussing these things with you. I think it's fascinating area of work. So stalking and harassment. This is a really, really wide topic, and probably in recent years has really come to the fore, not least because of the advent of social media and how easy it now is to abuse somebody. I think, or harass somebody. I think in 10, 15 years ago, it was really difficult. You'd have to ring somebody's landline, or you'd have to physically go to their house. Whereas now you can find somebody online probably in a matter of seconds, and you can start firing abuse off. There's group chats and that sort of thing as well. So this area of business, if you like, has absolutely ballooned in recent years from a policing perspective. And I think the first point on the slide there, really, it's quite often a wider issue, and it's indicative of other offences. So a low-level harassment, what might come into the police as what would appear on the face of it to be a low-level harassment, actually can sometimes lead to other domestic-related stuff, murder, sexual offences, domestic abuse. So it's really important that we respond to this accordingly and we don't trivialise it. Certainly if there's a domestic element to it. And I think from a child-on-child perspective, the social media thing, and you guys will know as much as I do, the problems that the likes of WhatsApp groups and Kik and Discord and things like that can cause. in terms of children being harassed in and out of school. And it means that what used to be a safe place, i.e. their homes, are no longer a safe place because they can receive the same abuse at home as they can at school from their peers. So it's really important, I think, that police and partner agencies respond accordingly to that and try and work with people and nip it in the bud. The impact of harassment on victims' families and communities can be devastating. That's obviously the wider harassment topic, but that comes down to things like antisocial behaviour and as I say, wider problems with the stress that it can put on other family members and other people involved directly with the victim. And I think, like I say, harassment, because it is such a broad topic, I think it is one of those that if we can react accordingly, it can have a direct impact on improving public satisfaction and confidence, because if we can respond and we can help people and stop it happening, it'll probably stop it happening to somebody else as well. And a lot of things like harassment that will be somebody's only interaction with the police, maybe in their lifetime. People who are not habitually involved with the police, and our response kind of sets the tone for how they feel about us and about partner agencies, in truth. Table there, probably similar to that last flow chart. You might struggle to read it if you've got a small screen, so I won't go through it too much really, but it just sets out the kind of the three main areas that we would constitute harassment really. Stalking obviously is probably a higher level than harassment, but there's a kind of an umbrella that covers all of these with and anyone can be as serious as the other one. But the stalking offence is a long-term or persistent or repeat pattern where an individual is fixated and or obsessed with another, and that they're really dangerous offences. They're people who get fixated and obsessed with people, and they can escalate really, really badly. Like I said on the first slide, into wider issues of things like murder and assaults and that sort of thing. So it's really important that we respond accordingly to that and that we assess the risk at every opportunity. Harassment, like I said, really broad term, but broadly it's causing alarm or distress, and it's not, ironically, specifically defined within the Protection from Harassment Act, but loosely it's repeated attempts to impose unwanted communications and contact on a victim in a manner that could be expected to cause distress or fear to any reasonable person. And that's really key, that any reasonable person. The person who's doing the harassing may not be able to see that rational thought, and that's the standard that we would have to meet to obtain the prosecution really. And the two main areas of that are Section 2, which is protection from harassment, and then Section 4, which is protection harassment with fear of violence. So that's kind of the next level up. And then controlling coercive behaviour. I'm not going to go into that in too much detail just because of the time constraints, but obviously that's a reasonably new offence in terms of us being able to prosecute it, but it's not a new offence in terms of that pattern of behaviour. And again, there you see College of Policing kind of definition of it. This offence is constituted by behaviour on the part of the perpetrator which takes place repeatedly or continuously in intimate or familial relationships. That's domestic violence, and that's quite often one of those offences that the victims will not even realise because there's a period of indoctrination and it just becomes almost the norm sometimes. And I think victims often don't even realise that they're victims of that until perhaps a third party can intervene or something else triggers an intervention by a third party, either you guys or us, and then it can open up the floodgates really about a load of other stuff, which leads back to serious sexual offences and that sort of thing. And to some degree, the topic that Val brought up there about forced marriage and that sort of thing, obviously that is a major part of that, controlling coercive behaviour, and that's where the familial side of it comes in, as well as the if they're in an intimate relationship or whether it's kind of instigated by a parent or other guardian. What is harassment? I think I've probably covered most of that in truth, but again, handy point of reference for you going forward. I think the really key message with this is that it's got to be a course of conduct, and the course of conduct is 2 or more. So 1, if somebody feels harassed but it's only happened once, that doesn't constitute the offence. That's not to say it's not wrong and that we won't record it and make and investigate it, But to make the offence out under the Harassment Act, there needs to be a pattern of behaviour or a course of conduct so the offence is made out. And then, yeah, I just covered there again about Section 2 and Section 4. One thing I really want to just impress on people, I think there was a culture probably 5 to 10 years ago in the police where our response to low-level harassment, and this would cover child-on-child offences on Facebook and that sort of thing in schools, was to issue what are called police information notices, or colloquially known as like harassment warnings. We don't use those anymore in Suffolk. They're a minefield. People think that they're subject to sort of criminal proceedings and that sort of thing. We don't issue them anymore. So if anybody says I want a harassment warning, that isn't how we will deal with it. We will record, as you can see there, a non-crime investigation, first-time harassment, and we will kind of work with the victim as to how they want us to respond to that. And then if a second incident is reported, obviously then the risk is reassessed and we'd instigate a full crime report and we progress through the criminal justice system. Stalking, like I said, kind of it's more serious in really holistic terms. It's more serious than harassment in most cases, and it's because it's a pattern of unwanted, fixated, or obsessive behaviour, which is intrusive upon someone's life. And that's quite a handy mnemonic there, just to remember what does constitute stalking. Again, I think it's quite easy for victims to minimise things in their own heads, that they're, you know, oh, this is just normal, this is just how the relationship is. I think as agencies that intervene in these, we need to be really clear that it's not acceptable, and kind of try and support people through that understanding so they can then start dealing with the consequences. So yeah, fixated, obsessive, unwanted and repeated, they're the real key points to stalking being made out and the offence being made out. And again, you can see some stats there. Those are from the College of Policing, and saying on average victims will suffer 100 incidents before they report it. That is probably higher than that now, I would say, with the advent of online abuse and that sort of thing, because you could send 100 messages within probably an hour on things like WhatsApp or various social media platforms, and we quite often find that people who are being stalked or harassed are victims of multiple, like a multi-strand approach from the suspect. So they might be getting bombarded on any of those platforms or all of those platforms at the same time. And I think the point there really is technology is often used as part of that stalking behaviour. That's right from the social media, and that goes right up the scale to covert cameras and that sort of thing, which we see quite a lot of. GPS trackers, people taking over social media accounts, that sort of thing. Very briefly there, cover about civil and criminal orders. So there are a range of civil and criminal orders available across different crime types. They'll often be essential to ensure the ongoing safety and security of victims. So if we can't secure a criminal prosecution, then obviously these civil routes are available. There's stalking protection orders. We can get restraining orders, a non-molestation order, which I'm sure a lot of you have come across in your lines of work. Domestic violence protection orders and notices. Again, that's a topic that I can cover in a later date. And an injunction to prevent nuisance and annoyance. Again, they're quite high level, and perhaps don't deal with maybe like school-on-school stuff or child-on-child stuff, but they are provisions that are available. Just a slide there about stalking protection orders. So they've only been in existence, if you like, and available to the police since January 2020, but they're really good power. And probably still a little bit underused at the moment, but they can be used in case of intimate, non-intimate and stranger stalking, and we can protect. They help us protect victims, and they give us powers to intervene if suspects continue that course of conduct. And the idea really is to nip it in the bud before it gets to a level where there is serious offences occurring, i.e. Assault, sexual assaults, or even murders and that sort of thing. I think the key messages really that I would try and put across to people here are that we focus on the risk. Everything we do in the police is risk managed and risk assessed and dynamically risk assessed, and stalking and harassment is, like I said right at the beginning, really, really key that we are alive to that risk and the wider issues. Just because somebody's ringing somebody 500 times in a night, what else are they doing that the victim doesn't know about? Are they sitting outside their house? And we can build a really good picture using things like NPR, like automatic number plate recognition. And it's just really important that at that first contact we're alive to all that risk and we can try and mitigate it wherever possible. I think it's really important that we don't downplay it. So please, again, similar to the reporting stuff to the police for assaults, I think it's really important that we know about harassment at any level. That online reporting tool is brilliant. It might be that it's just reported at the low level. Somebody will get a reference number, but that's then available to kickstart anything that an investigation further down the line if it's a pattern of behaviour that starts emerging. Again, if we don't know about the first one, then we can't effectively investigate the second one. We're at ground zero. So really important that anything that escalates outside of what is probably deemed as reasonable on social media and that sort of thing, that is reported to us, please. Listen to the victim. Again, that's really important. And I think it's really important that we try not to marginalise victims and make them feel kind of isolated, and that we listen to what they're saying. And don't think that they're exaggerating the situation. We need to be really reactive to what their perception of the situation is and respond accordingly. And just finally, really, the motivation of the suspect and the context and the effect of that behaviour having on the victim, and they help us make the right decisions. I think I've covered most of that in fairness, and that just this is what I was saying about how stalking and harassment has evolved over the last few years, and what used to be quite difficult is now not difficult, and it actually can become massively intrusive with just a small amount of knowledge. People can have spyware apps installed on their phone, which will monitor and emulate legitimate apps. You can remotely access people's phones, see there, collect text calls, GPS, Facebook, Twitter, track victims, and that's really basic stuff, like even down to find my friends on Facebook. That's so find my friends on iPhones. If your location service is switched on and you've got that, if somebody gets your phone, they can quickly add themselves, and suddenly they've got access to literally everything you're doing. And then things like activating microphones, AirPods are another real bone of contention there. You can leave your AirPods in a room, go and sit in another room, connect your AirPods and listen to what people are saying. So moral of that story is don't leave your AirPods lying around. And yeah, just a bit there about social networking, really. Again, this is a massive topic, and I think I could probably talk to you for hours about the issues that we have with online harassment, stalking, grooming, and that sort of thing within my team. But I think, you know, like I say, if you've got specific cases you'd want me to discuss, then please come to me directly, and I'll quite happily work through those with you. I think the last thing I want to leave you guys with, and this is something that certainly partners in the MASH will be very aware of, there's a real drive in Suffolk and nationally, in truth, about the voice of the child, and this has come largely from the Arthur Lavinia Hughes tragedy, and this puts the child at the forefront of everything we do. So in my arena, in internet child abuse, this covers not only children who are victims, but also children who we might perceive as being the suspect. And I use that term loosely, but children that we refer to the harmful sexual behaviour service. It's really important that we consider the voice of the child and we address why the behaviour is occurring. And I think this is key to the investigation of literally anything that involves children, is understanding why it's happened, and what the child's perspective is on it. And that mnemonic there, I think that's not police specific. I think that is probably transferable across, like I say, anybody who's dealing with children. So are there children present at an address? Review the circumstances and what is the risk to that child. And the next one, the T, the take time to speak with children, ask them how they're feeling and record what they say. That's really important, because what children say, children don't tend to lie as much as perhaps adults do, and it's really important that we listen to what they're saying and we react accordingly. And their demeanour, are they shy, retiring, nervous, that sort of thing. Anything that would cause us concern, really. And these from a policing perspective of all massive elements that we need to include in our MASH referrals, so that children and young people services can work with us, and we can try and address the issues that are there. And just because a child says that there's nothing wrong doesn't mean there's nothing wrong. I think that understanding their wishes, thoughts and feelings, that's about building that trust and confidence with children, really, and not promising things you can't deliver, but equally making sure that you know that they know that you're there to support them, and just record any detail, because little things that children say, which might seem trivial at one point, might quickly take on a wider context later down the line when we start looking at other evidence. We had a job in our office where we went and investigating a gentleman for indecent images of children. We go there, he gets arrested. We do a Section 47 visit with social care to speak to the children. They don't reveal anything to us. Dad's bailed, he's removed from the address. 6 months later, we start reviewing the devices because of digital forensics delays and stuff like that. And then we find on that device there's live contact abuse, essentially. The dad's taking pictures of himself abusing the children when they're asleep. If we'd have just kind of taken their word for it, if you like, at point A, some of it might be that they're not aware of it because they're asleep, or B, it's normalised behaviour, so they don't realise it's wrong. But we then went back to that body-worn camera footage of when we'd spoken to the children, and actually it takes on a whole new context. So it's really, really important that if you haven't got body-worn, I appreciate that's a sort of police-specific resource, but just do what you can to record what they say and support them through it. And that's me, really. Like I say, I apologise for that being a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really. They're big topics, which so you can probably speak all day about, but hopefully that gives you a flavour. And like I say, please feel free to contact me by any way, means, or carrier pigeons, and I'll be happy to discuss any of the topics I've brought up today.
Thanks very much, Nick. That's really, really informative, really useful. As I say, as Nick said, I've got the slides, so I will send out all of the slides to everybody after the webinar. And because I know you've got to go, haven't you, shortly, Nick, I think, so.
Yeah, so yeah, I've got another commitment at 11, so we'll have to dive out fairly shortly, but so I apologise for that. But yeah, guys, honestly, if there's any questions, there's no silly questions. If there's anything I haven't covered, please feel free to point that out, because I don't know what I don't know.
Thank you. Great. So we'll move on to look at the role of the SARC, which is Lou Elmy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to also attempt to share my screen now. Bear with me because it wasn't working for me the other day. Can they be seen?
Yep, we can see them, Lou, yeah.
Wonderful. Success. That's the first one for today. That's brilliant. Okay. So my name's Lou Elmy. I am the SARC and ISFA manager for the Ferns. That's the Sexual Assault Referral Centre and the Independent Sexual Violence Advisors. We are located in Ipswich, but we cover the whole of Suffolk. We don't have any age restrictions. We take everyone from birth to death. There's no restrictions on gender. However anybody identifies, they're all acceptable for any services that we can provide to them. So the aim of the SARC really is to ensure that we do have forensic capture, yes, if that's what's required, but primarily we're there to help promote the recovery and health if someone has had a rape or a sexual assault, and that doesn't matter when that assault has occurred. If it's something that has been within the last 7 days, there is, as Nick has already pointed out, an opportunity for some forensic capture, especially if they want to at some point go along the criminal justice route. But that's not necessary. If people don't want to report, they can still come to us. If they want to capture that forensic evidence, we can store it for up to 2 years. In that time, they can change their mind. If they want to do that, they would have to contact us, say that's what they want to do, because we'd need their consent to pass it to the police. Without that, we just don't tell the police that they've even been to us. There's no knowledge of the police, no, they've been in, what's happened to them or anything else, unless there are other wider safeguarding aspects or there's a danger to the public. When what we're talking about here with being children, we would be involving the police probably purely because there is a safeguarding need. But overall, most of our clients, if they wish to, do not have to report. What I would say is invariably most people will involve the police at some point. So we want to care for the complainants when they come in with high standards, with the care that they require for their recovery and their resilience building. So the actual forensic capture is very secondary to what we do within the SARC. That's a small part of the caseloads that we hold, but we do hold specific caseloads within the ISVA service, which perhaps have never ever been to the SARC because the offences have happened to people some years before, so therefore they don't come in for that. And that's probably the biggest part of our work. So what we do is we tend to hold those cases if they're in the criminal justice service for many years, potentially. It might only just be a few weeks, and then we'll work with other agencies. And the reason we do that is because we have some really good third sector agencies who offer the ongoing recovery and resilience building that we don't actually offer in the SARC ourselves currently. Our ISVAs, for example, are not counsellors. They are there to offer emotional support, practical support, and to ensure that everyone is safe, but they don't offer any counselling. So that's where we work with Suffolk Rape Crisis, Fresh Start New Beginnings, Survivors in Transition, and other agencies dependent on people's needs. We do have a talk and therapies attached to our SARC, and that is a provision that is in place primarily for people who've had a very recent assault and are deemed to be in need of some kind of talk and therapy, irrespective of whether they're going to follow the criminal justice process. That is also currently provided by Survivors in Transition. So we have some really good links with all the third sector agencies. Now, in 2006, there was quite a big review by Baroness Stern, and you can see the quote there of what was said, and that is a very well used quote for many people. But that is really the ethos of what we work through. It really makes no difference to us what status the client needs to be with as to whether or not they want to report. We just want to help them recover and rebuild their lives. And in response to that report, we actually opened our SARC in 2011. It's joint funded by the PCC and NHS England. So we are police employees. We are, however, we enjoy really good relationships with the safeguarding houses, which Nick's already spoken about, and we enjoy our relationships with the police, but we are essentially not police. And I think it's important that our clients understand that we are very independent from them and information won't be shared unless they agree to that. We offer a 24-hour service for police referrals. If somebody wishes to self-refer, we do try to have that in hours, in other words, not overnight, but again, depending on the circumstances, that can be changed. Self-referrals, we would like them to be over 18. If they are under 18 and older than 13, we want a responsible adult with them. They will still be safeguarded. We still expect to have the safeguarding in place, and that will vary between circumstances and individuals. And if they're under 12, they will come into our child SARC, which is a little bit different to how we operate in the adult side. So the adults can attend at any time. They can be seen by one of our forensic nurses. They can have a full medical forensic examination. The under 12s are seen in our child SARC, which is that's facilitated by a paediatrically trained doctor, which may or may not be female. We're all female with the forensic nurses, but we may have a male doctor for the children. Although I can currently say I don't think there's anyone in this area at the moment who is male. And the examination for a child who's 12 or under is very different to the one that's for the older children. It's not invasive. It's very much taken from the outside area of wherever is the DNA needs to be collected. There are photographs taken. There is a body map that is completed, especially if there are any marks and bruises. And the children are not traumatized by this. Everything is done with their consent. We need them to be compliant to be able to get this. And if they're not happy for anybody to do anything, such as taking any swabs or photographs, then it's not going to be in their interests to try and persuade them or to force them. So it takes a while they're there. The benefits of coming to us is, as you probably are aware, most children don't come to us in a forensically live window. They tend to have had very what we call historical accounts. They might disclose some time after the assault has occurred, months or even years potentially. We also know that invariably these children, it would be an assault by somebody they know and trust. So for all sorts of reasons, they don't necessarily disclose at the time of the assault. That means that forensic capture is very, very low on our agenda. It's going to be more of a wellbeing medical check for these children. We want to make sure that there are no ongoing injuries that might need addressing or that might cause them harm and need to be put right for them. They might occasionally need reassurance that their own genitalia is actually still okay. But what we're also able to do is we're able to offer those under 12 an STI screening, which they can't actually access via the mainstream iCache at this current time. So if the child wasn't to come to us, that opportunity would be lost. And there has been a case where, despite there being no disclosure from a young girl, she had her STI screening and was actually found to be positive for chlamydia, which did in fact put a different stance upon the investigation. So it's always worthwhile that these children come to us. What we don't want to do is traumatize them. So it's very gentle, and we try to make it a bit of an event for them. There is a toy room that they can play in if they're younger. We have a tablet for them to play games on if they're a bit older. We have everything that we can do to try and make it comfortable. So if anyone parent-wise or professional-wise is a little bit concerned about coming to us, we can offer that reassurance that the child will actually be okay. We do also offer a 24-hour advice line. It's answered by ourselves in hours. After hours, it goes to our forensic services who manage the forensic nurses and the doctors. That's Mountain Healthcare, but very soon that will probably be coming back to us. That was an arrangement that was put in place in COVID, and that's all going to be brought back to us. But if anybody has any questions, either as a professional or as a care provider, then they can call us and we will seek to try and find out what it is they need, get them their advice sorted, and hopefully put them in the right direction for what it is they require. So we work predominantly with the forensic nurses, and they're assisted by crisis workers. The crisis workers are the people who are the hand holders for if somebody comes in. They are skilled in knowing what is needed, but they don't do any forensic exam. They do everything else, and they ensure that the welfare and the safety of that person is paramount. They're their advocate, really. As I've said before, we do have 24-hour access. There is some discussion as to whether that might change in the future, but this is the current status. And you do have the choice to report to police or self-refer. If someone self-refers and then decide they want to report to police, we can also support them in that, make sure that they have all the evidence that is required if they want to go along that route, because we've already gained the forensic evidence and we can store it. They're all for female nurses currently for children aged 13 and over. And we have a dedicated forensically approved premises that is currently also being put through the ISO accreditation to make sure that any forensic evidence we gain will be admissible in court in the future, due to all the changes that are coming up in the future that we are going to have to adhere to. There's two, as I've already said, one is the adult and one is the children's. They're in adjoining buildings, but they are quite separate. We do also we support all complaints of sexual assault. So for a forensic capture, primarily we find that we get most evidence if it's a penetrative offence, but that doesn't mean to say that the trauma experienced from somebody who has had some sexual touching is not the same as somebody who's had a rape. Excuse me. So if somebody comes to us and they've had a non-penetrative offence, we can still try some forensic capture from parts of the body. We've taken swabs, skin swabs, but it's about their ongoing progression into recovery. And that really is where our ISVAs can come into play. The independent sexual violence advisors are established really to help people through the criminal justice process, which for most people is alien to them. They don't understand what the process is. They're also the single point of contact, if the client should wish it, between the client and the officer in the case. Very frequently, we have clients who they feel uncomfortable that they don't have the updates from the officers that they would like to have. This is because the officers just don't have anything else to give them. An investigation can take a considerable amount of time, but our clients don't perceive that the time it takes for them to make a full investigation is correct. They perceive that it should be much faster, because the only knowledge base they've got is from things they see on the TV and things like that. And of course, as we all know, somebody gets arrested and then they're in court the next day. So from that perspective, the ISVA can give updates according to what the needs are of the client. The ISVA, currently they're all female. She will speak to the officer in the case. She will gauge what's needed and she'll pass any information over if that is what the client needs. What they can't do, however, is be party to the details of the case. They may know some, but the fact of the assault is all they really need. They don't need to know everything that's happened, and they do not discuss those details with the client. This is where people can get a little bit confused, because I think if they've got an ISVA, that's someone they can talk to about what's happened to them. But the ISVAs are very boundaried and they make it very clear from the start they're not there to discuss details of the case. That's because it can actually have an impact on them supporting them in a court environment if it gets that far. So that is not something that happens, and they're not counsellors. We do have the pathways in place for that sort of thing with the partner agencies. We have data collection procedures, and everything we store is in a secure cloud-based program that cannot be accessed by anyone except the SARC. It can't be accessed by police. If anybody needs to have any information, they have to request it. It has to be consented to by the client, with the exception of a court judgment. So everybody who wants to come to us and give us information, we can secure on that system. If somebody wants to come to us and provide intelligence about something that's happened to them, we're happy to speak to them. We're happy to take that information, but without certain pieces of very crucial information in that, we can't necessarily do much with it. We can put it on a different system that the police do use. So it might be highlighted at some point if this person continues to offend against others, but we need very detailed specifics such as the offender's name, their date of birth, their address. And without those all three elements, it's very hard to actually get that matched up to something else. What we are finding, however, is we've got a reasonably sized cohort of people who want to just come and tell us what's happened. And that's all they want to do. They just want to say what their experience is, know that it's recorded somewhere, and that makes them feel better and able to move on with their recovery. And we're happy to do that, so long as they understand the limitations. We have our paediatric clinic, which are the ones you would most likely need to hook into twice a week. That's our scheduled, that's on a Monday and a Thursday. Is for children 12 and under. There's also a weekend provision for any children that have a forensically live case on a weekend, and that is covered throughout the whole of the region. Everywhere from Hertfordshire, Essex, Norfolk, Suffolk, Bedfordshire. We all take a turn in who hosts the actual clinic on a Saturday. All I would say on that is, please, if you've got something that comes through, speak to everybody as soon as you can to make sure that it's put into the domain as quickly as possible, because it can take a little while to sort out. And if we need to move a child to a different area or have a doctor move to our area, that takes a little bit of sorting out and arranging. Every child that comes to us will need to be safeguarded anyway. The forensic nurses and doctors hopefully will be involved in the strat from the outset. But if there's any questions at all that you need about the SARC process, about anything that happens, we're more than happy to answer it, and we can put you through to the right people if there's something that we can't deal with ourselves. These are just a few pieces of data. This is actually for the quarter previous to this one. The reason I put those in before was because we had a considerable jump in the children and young people in the 13 to 17 age group coming into both the SARC and the ISVA service. That we'd found that it almost sort of tripled over the previous quarters in how many had come in. That's stabilized a little bit. I think probably because of school holidays, people have not necessarily had the chance to report. But now the young people are back at school, we might find that it's changing, and we've already seen a slight rise again. So I think the peer-on-peer abuse is very significant, especially to this age group. As Nick has already touched on, a lot of their education is via the internet. We can't necessarily govern what it is they're seeing and learning about, and once they've seen it, you can't unsee it. So I think that's all having an impact. We're also seeing more cases of what we think is child sexual exploitation, very often unrecognised by the young people who are actually subject to it. I've just seen a note there, a chronological age. I'll come back to that one in a moment if that's okay. I think the hardest thing is young people do not necessarily want to engage, especially with police. It's a difficult one because I can appreciate how it's the type of thing whereby, firstly, they may not recognise that something that's happened to them is an assault. Secondly, they may not want to deal with it at that time. And thereon in, they sometimes just want to put it to one side and not deal with it until later. Unfortunately, it does come back and impact them in adult life. So what we're seeing now is this large increase of people who are disclosing. I think this is probably just a very small amount compared to the overall numbers where they're finding this abuse is happening. And in 10 to 15, 20 years, we're going to find another big surge of people in that age group who are affected by the trauma that they have had inflicted upon them from a younger age. Not everybody, some people deal with it better, but it is the trauma that tends to come back later on with events in their older lives. So trying to get these young people in a better place is going to reap benefits for us later in the future. What we are finding is the chances of actually getting a lot of the cases to CPS threshold to go to court are not high. We all know the statistics for that nationally. We're also finding that a lot of the cases that do end up going that way are being delayed by a long time, which means that people are disengaging. So the numbers who are actually going through the criminal justice process and actually getting a successful conviction are quite low compared to those people who actually need to just get on with their lives and recover. So as a SARC, we are now putting plans actively into place to do more resilience and recovery programs. I've just sent 2 ISVAs on Train the Trainer for the Escape the Trap program. My feeling is that all young people, irrespective of whether or not they've been identified as having been in that kind of relationship, could access this prior to even getting to that point, so that they never ever engage in those activities. We're looking at all sorts of programs that could help, and that's where I think everybody with access to young children in their care could look at what we're going to be doing. But more information will go out about that when we've got more in place. Other than that, I think the only thing that we can do is, if you find that you need advice about anything with the children, or even the adults that care for them, please give us a call, because we'll do everything we can to try and find out what it is you need. Most of us are also looking at co-vulnerabilities. We have a high number of children with learning needs, with maybe some substance abuse, and there's almost always some mental health issues such as anxiety or self-harm connected to those children that come into us. So it's not just the fact they've had an assault, there's all the wider issues that need addressing, and we can then put them out to the other agencies who can help from there. So we're really just a starting point for everything else that we'll need doing. Has anybody got any questions at the moment? Anything I can answer? I've whistled through that.
Yeah, sorry, can I just check with you? Thank you very much for that lovely explanation. I just want to check with you. Most of the time when we have referrals come in, I work for Children's Services, the strategy discussion most of the time is already been done by MASH, and we just get that referral to say this child is made, this allegation is gone on for maybe joint or, you know, whatever, section 47. But I observe that you guys don't really take active part in the joint. Are you I don't know, are you meant to be? Sorry.
Well, we have found that as well. I would agree with that. We've found that there is a varying degree of our being invited in, really is the best way to put it. The forensic nurses really should be involved with the police and social care for the strat, especially where there's going to be a section 47 needs to be spoken about and how we're going to do things. So predominantly it would probably be the forensic nurses. However, we do recognise that they're not always being involved, at least not at the right time. That is something that we have spoken about with social care on several occasions. It sometimes gets better and then it tails off again. So it's a learning curve. We'll get there. We'll have to keep speaking to them. What we have now got about to come in place via the Mountain Healthcare Service is a worker who will specifically be there to coordinate the childhood strats, so that any child that's going to be coming to us, they have to be involved in that strat before they even get that far. and hopefully that will make that service far more streamlined and actually correct for that child. But they're not quite in post yet. They have been engaged, but because police have a very strong vetting system, it takes a while for them to get in, but hopefully in the next few weeks that will all be in place, and we're hoping we'll find it work a lot better.
Thank you very much. So there's no designated person at the moment to contact for such discussions?
No, at the moment, I would say contact the SARC or Mountain Healthcare. It wouldn't matter which you contacted, and we would get the nurse or the doctor involved.
Okay, thank you.
Does anybody have anything else? I did note that there was something there about an age category, but it flicked off my screen before I got there.
Yeah, it's there. It's in the chat.
Yeah,
Lou. It's
just trying to
from
bring it
Lisa.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from me. Sorry, I just wanted to know, because you've got your your age 12 and below and your age 13 and above. I was just asking whether it was strictly chronological age, because obviously some children have quite significant learning. You touched on the learning disability and physical disability. Would there be some flexibility around that, because it's quite difficult to put them in that category?
It really is. What I would say to you is 12 is the age we use. However, we have had young people as old as 16 or 17, especially when they've got a learning disability, because it's about them being able to access other services that are appropriate for them. And if we find that they've got a vulnerability like a learning disability, then obviously it's better that they're seen by us and things are put in place than it is that they are just left to touch on the other mainstream services they might not be able to go to. And I would agree with you, if they've got a physical disability and they're already with us, it makes sense that they are seen. The STI screening, if nothing else. The only problems we would have is that the doctors who work for Mountain Healthcare, who we commission in for all of this, are a little bit thin on the ground, which is why we've only got the Mondays and the Thursdays. And if they are at the point where they're forensically live but coming towards the end of a window, they might not get the forensics and the STI screening at the same time. It might have to be separate occasions. But that is something we could negotiate, and it's certainly not a case of that's your cut off. If you're 13, you don't come into us. We can always negotiate, and we have done that.
Thank you. I think one of the things also I'd like to just point out, having visited the SARC, is the really sort of the positive attitude is that you enter from the back of the building, and as I believe it still happens, and you move forward. So you're always taking steps forward rather than revisiting what might have happened in the past. And it's just something that's may seem very simple, but I think it's quite an important sort of philosophy to sort of be guided by, really.
It really is. That patient journey for us is really important. As you said, they come in through the back of the building because that's where it's forensically clean. We want to eliminate any transference of DNA as much as possible. So yes, absolutely, they come in that way. They have the discussion. They then decide if they're going to consent for an examination. They'll go into the forensic room. They'll have that done, and they'll come out the other side of the building. So it's almost like they are starting their journey to recovery. It's a very, very small psychological thing that we can help them with. We take it for granted that that's what happens, but the feedback we get from clients is that for them, it feels like they've already started that journey for their recovery, and that's what we're there for primarily.
I think Michelle's got a question.
Yeah, hi Louise, it's Michelle, County Safeguarding Manager. With your agreement, what I'm going to do is liaise with Zoe and Chris, who are my colleague safeguarding managers in the west and the north of the county, just to say that for those complex strategy meetings that we chair, so they're either multi-victims or single victims where it's a very complicated case, so that we can get you invited to those complex strats from the get-go, because they're a threshold discussion as well, and that seems to me to be really sensible. So what I'll do is I'll talk to them, and then we'll liaise with our business support manager, so you go on our standard invites. Is that all right for those?
Would be brilliant.
Yeah, thank you for that.
That
Just
could
didn't
make
want you to start getting invites and think, what are they doing here? So we'll do it because I
No,
think it's
no,
really
we'd take
important.
it. If we got an invite, we'd take it, and then if
Brilliant.
it wasn't for us, we'd move away again. But I think for that client, it's really important that they understand exactly what will be happening to them.
Yeah.
And it's very hard because a decision could be made which is not correct purely because they haven't taken that element into consideration when they've done the strats.
Yeah. And I think as well for the social workers and or police who are like working with those young people or those children, I think, you know, sometimes there's a fear, isn't there? And I know there shouldn't be a fear about going to the SARC, but actually, if the social worker is able to appropriately say, or the police officer is able to appropriately say, you know, these people have already been involved in the meeting, so they do know some of it already. So, you know, it gives that, it's a bit of an icebreaker, so they can use it appropriately, but it's quite good that they might not have to start with the whole situation again, although they would, but do you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely, I totally agree. And it could be that after that, it's decided that the young person doesn't come to the SARC.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is absolutely fine, but they would then be flagged to us so that we can then put the further support in place for them if they want it, if they consent to an ISVA, if they consent to a talk and therapies referral or anything like that. Whereas I feel we're probably missing a number of these young people because they're never flagged to us to begin with.
I agree. And I think like from safeguarding managers' perspective, when we're doing those actions, if you're there, like you say, it may be that the SARC isn't the appropriate route, but you would be signposting, making recommendations about this, and it just enriches those actions from the get-go. They're more informed. So I just think it's vital we have you there.
No, we'd be more than happy to join you. Absolutely. We'd look forward to those invites.
Brilliant. Thank you. Oh, you might regret that, but thank you.
No, we wouldn't.
Thanks, Louise.
Thank you.
Sorry, Zoinda again. I just want to check, do you have any email address that we can use for invites?
Yes, we do. We have several actually, depending on which system you want. So if you Google the Ferns, it will come up with everything you want by way of email addresses.
All right, that's fine.
On there, because we have the SARC, we have the ISVAs, we have different ones depending on what it is you need at any time.
Okay. Thank you, Lou. That's really
I'm
informative.
afraid I can't see hands or anything here, so I have to rely on your.
Yeah, there
Thank
aren't any
you.
more. I can't see any more hands. So
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lou. Just to say, we're running a bit over, but if people are happy to stay, I think it'll be really useful to hear this next section regarding the harmful sexual behaviour service. So if you can't, obviously, we are recording it, so we'll send you the link anyway. But if you can, it'd be great. So I think it's Janet that's going to do the next section.
Hi all, yes, it is me. I know it's our numbers are dropping. I won't take it personally. Okay, so if you bear with me, I will try and share my screen. I think I'll take control first. I'm a bit of a technophobe, so please bear with me. Okay, let's have a look. Right. Can you let me know if you can see it? Because I'm not sure how I'm doing.
Yeah, we can see it, Janet. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you got the first one up? Yeah. Lovely.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, brilliant. I'll just introduce myself just briefly. So my name is Janet. I work for the HSB service. I'm currently actually on a secondment within the service. So normally I work for Youth Justice Service, and I have specialism in working with harmful sexual behaviour. And I am an AIM trained practitioner within that service. But my current secondment is basically developing, and we've had this running up for since about January, our consultation service. And the whole idea of the consultation service is that basically anybody, schools, social care, early help, can come to us if they've got any worries or concerns about any young people and their behaviours. And as I say, we've had a lot of consultations since we started in January. We're very, very busy with them. But I think that I like to think that they provide a really good service as that first point of contact, particularly I think with schools when they're a little, you know, want a bit of advice about where to go, basically what the next steps are with their cases. And with that, we can provide sort of advice. We can provide resources for work to do with young people. And also in some of those kind of high-end cases, we can recommend that a referral gets put into the HSB service where a trained practitioner, which again would be somebody attached to Youth Justice Service, would be able to complete a full assessment for those young people. But I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit further along. So let's go along. Just to on this first slide, basically, is just our contact details. So that's the direct contact details. If you were to request a consultation, that would go through there. And on that website, there's also the consultation form, which is very, very easy to fill in, comes through to us, and actually you generally get an allocated Teams meeting, usually fairly quickly, within, I would say normally within a week or so. You don't normally have to hang about very long. So that's the point of contact for that. I've left this slide in. We normally use it for when we do our general presentations, but the reason I've left it in is actually I think it's a really important to have this in here. When we talk about sexual abuse, and particularly when we're talking about sexual abuse that involves children, it's obviously very, very emotive, and I think that we sometimes don't think about how that might impact on us and also about other people. So we're talking about, you know, any staff members, all the children involved, parents, anybody like that. We don't know, you know, who may have been impacted by sexual abuse in their past. And also, I think it's very important to remember the bit about how it affects us in different ways and at different times. We know that some people deal really, really well with what potentially could be very serious incidents. And also we know that some people who are involved in maybe what we would consider to be quite low-level incidents are really significantly impacted by that. So I just think it's really, really important to remember this. And I think the bit is about being kind to ourselves and to others and respecting others, but also to be really, really aware of the feelings and experience of other people when you're discussing these subjects, I think. Everyone's invited. Again, we just like to kind of touch on this. I'm sure that a lot of people are aware of this site, but for those of you who are not, it's there's a few quotes there which are basically testimonials from people who have been impacted by some kind of harmful sexual behaviour, whether it's rape or sexual abuse or sexual harassment. This was set up, this site initially, it followed the founder's sort of initial posting about what she described as a rape culture, and about its prevalence basically in the community and about education facilities in particular. And so this site was set up on the basis of that. It was only set up in 2020, and as of sort of July last year, there were over 50,000 testimonials that had been uploaded onto this site. And I know that currently they're not taking any more because they've actually got such a backlog that they're having issues uploading the testimonials. So they've actually put a hold on them currently. As part of some of the testimonials, what they've also done is they've got a list of schools, colleges, where a lot of these incidents have happened and about the responses from those incidents. But so what they've done is they've allowed the people that have been uploading testimonials to actually name the school or college where they were at the time. And I think it's a bit of an eye-opener. I think I went on there a few months ago and had a look at sort of all the local schools and colleges and sort of, you know, had a look at all the names and went through, there's an alphabetical list on there. And I was actually quite astounded to see, you know, all, you know, the ones that I actually recognise, that so schools and colleges in this area. And I think we might think that actually, you know, our local school, our own school that maybe we work at, or our community school wouldn't be on there, but actually you might be really, really surprised to go on there. And it's not about name and shaming, because that isn't what it's about. I think the idea of putting it on there was to actually demonstrate that it's such a widespread issue, and that it's been going on for quite a long time. A lot of the testimonies are from sort of young adults or even older adults where they've had sort of historic issues happen within their educational establishments. And so I think it's about recognising that actually the impact of this, the things that are happening in our schools and colleges at the moment, are having a major impact on the lives of adults in the future. So it's just an interesting site, I think, to go on and just maybe have a look and see whether your own school is on there, or whether, you know, your local sort of primary school is on there. And again, there are lots and lots of primary schools on there as well. On the basis of that, I think on the set, officers were asked to carry out a review of sexual abuse in schools and colleges, and I've just put the link up there for that, just that, so that you can have a look at it. And again, there's some sort of interesting findings, and I think the outcomes of that was about driving forward with sort of some more provision within schools to actually deal with this. And this is one point that came out of it. If children are at risk, whether within or outside school gate, school have a responsibility to work with multi-agency partners to share information where appropriate and refer children on for support and protection. And I think the reason why we've put that particular slide up is we are actually aware ourselves of some issues around that. So again, I'll go on to the next slide. Which it said that, however, it's important to note that while some multi-agency work may continue, the aftermath of any investigation is often left with school leaders who have little guidance to support their decision making. Some leaders have talked about how difficult it was to make effective decisions where police and other lengthy multi-agency investigations were ongoing. And we know that this is a big, big issue. And I think from the consultations that we do, we recognise that actually it's a big issue. You know, it's very difficult to be making those kinds of decisions about what you're going to do if you've got a young person that's accused another person of doing something in school. One is when actually the investigations are ongoing, but two is often once those investigations have been finalised. A lot of these investigations don't end up going anywhere. So, and I think Nick spoke a lot about, you know, not wanting to criminalise young people, and that's one reason. But also a lot of time, it's about the kind of evidential pathways, and often, you know, there are retractions or confusion in evidence and things like that. So often we'll find that a lot of these cases are NFA. There's no further action being taken by the police, and I think schools then find that they're left to deal with the sort of safeguarding concerns and the fallout from that without the support of the police, and often without the support of maybe social care, that maybe because, you know, they've done their joint assessment with the police and it has been NFA, there's actually no further role from them at that point. And again, hopefully that's where, you know, we can come in. Often we do come in before that, but often, you know, that's the case where schools maybe will be contacting us and asking for a consultation to have a discussion about, you know, what needs to be done going forward and what sort of help and support we can provide for schools. I just want to touch on a little bit about language as well. Often when we're, you know, when we've had a police investigation, we are talking, you know, we get language such as, you know, the perpetrator, or what we try and think about is to think about the language that we use. We try and use person who's been harmed and person who hasn't been harmed. And when we talk about the children, we talk about the child that's been harmed and not the child who has harmed. again, this is about that kind of labelling process. You know, we're not talking about sex offenders. What we're talking about is young people. We're talking about children predominantly who have been involved in harmful sexual behaviour of one kind or another. So I think talking about perpetrators is very damaging, and that language can follow them a bit forward as well. And again, I'll touch on that a little bit further along. So the Centre of Expertise in Child Sexual Abuse, who we deal with, we've got close contacts with, have talked about the damaging effects of stigmatising young people as mini adult sex offenders, and also about the potential for that to maybe even increase the likelihood of offending. We all know about labelling theories and how often once that label's applied, the impact of that sort of within that child's community and how they are seen by other people can actually often, you know, increase their risk of actually living up to that label and becoming a label that's been given to them. And also about the harm that this can cause going forward, and particularly I think when we're talking about children developing into young adults and the impact of that in their future and their future plans. For instance, we had a young person who was 17 years of age who had applied to one of the local YMCAs for accommodation, and the YMCA did all due diligence and did their police checks, and it came back that actually this young person had been involved in an incident in the concern of indecent images of children, and so obviously the YMCA's response to that would be that they wouldn't have him living in the property, but they did have some contact with us at the time, so they did sort of message us and say, you know, was there any chance we could put some context onto this, and we were able to let them know that actually the incident that was been spoken about was actually when he was 12. He'd had a girlfriend and they had shared images, and he'd sent a picture of his penis to a girlfriend. This had got reported because the parents had found it, and he had been investigated for that. Now, obviously, when you put it in that kind of context, we can see that actually that young person is at 17, is not a risk to other children living there. And YMCA were able to kind of, you know, make a decision on the basis of the context of that. But as you can say, if they hadn't had that sort of contact with us and that ability to come to us and talk to us about it, then this young man, you know, would have been faced with some sort of serious consequences of something that happened many, many years ago, and something was actually quite a low-level incident. So we just need to be really, really careful, I think, about sort of language that we use. And again, we are talking about, you know, children. So I just want to talk to you a little bit about the kind of definition. I've talked about us being harmful sexual behaviour service, and it's the definition of that is really, really important. We use Hackett's definition. This was he wrote this in 2014, and we use Hackett quite a lot. He's got a continuum that we use to identify the types of abuse as well, which will types of behaviour. So I'll have a look at that on the next slide. But just really importantly, just to have a look at this, he talks about sexual behaviours expressed by children and young people under the age of 18 years old that are developmentally inappropriate, may be harmful towards self or others, or be abusive towards another child, young person, or adult. And I think there's a few points to take out of this. So he said on there about the important thing about terminology is that it's accurate descriptions of the physical acts committed, rather than sort of jargon-ridden phrases and euphemisms. And again, that's really important. It's really difficult when we get referrals come through which say inappropriate behaviour, inappropriate language. We don't know what that means, because actually what you may think is inappropriate, I may not think is inappropriate, or the next person may not think is inappropriate. So it's really, really difficult, I think, sometimes for us, one, to be thinking about children and sexual behaviours, and to be really specific about it. And often, you know, people get embarrassed. They, you know, they struggle to actually use the proper words for things. But I think it's really important that we have to kind of get over that and think about, you know, if we're not comfortable using the right language, or we're not comfortable using the proper description about what has actually happened, then how do we expect young people to actually understand themselves? So we need to be really, really clear about what's happened. So if anybody puts a referral through, please, you know, don't be embarrassed about using, you know, a clear description of what has actually happened. The other thing on this, I think, is, and I think it's something that often gets missed out, is about harmful towards self. And what we're talking about there is, we can talk about that kind of physical harm. So we might be talking about a male maybe that's masturbating excessively, that's causing him physical harm, but also is impacting on his daily life, because he's doing it so much that he's having to, you know, he's avoiding going out with friends, or he's leaving classes in the middle of the day so that he can go to the bathrooms or something like that. So it can be that kind of physical and emotional harm and harm to his kind of relationships in that way. But also somebody who is looking at Pornhub, for instance, or and looking at really significant images, or searching for significant images, and is possibly, you know, if we have a young person that might be looking at indecent images of children being abused by adults, then the harm, obviously we know it's illegal, but actually the harm in the viewing can be quite significant. We're talking about young people that, you know, are developing kind of normal sexuality, developing normal sexual feelings, desires, knowing what it is that excites them. And when they are then starting to view some really significant images of children online, and other significant stuff that we see young people looking at and searching for, this impacts them massively, and kind of changes what they believe maybe going forward is the things that actually they like sexually, and then may then lead them to be progressing towards actually committing those kinds of acts, and, you know, those contact offences, because they may feel that that is the only thing that excites them sexually. So we need to be really, really clear that when we're talking about harmful sexual behaviour, yes, the majority of the time we are talking about young people that harm others, but actually we need to be thinking also about the harm that they may be causing themselves as well. Just a little note on the bottom there also is that 1/3 of sexual offences against children and young people are committed by other children and young people, and that's often quite an eye-opener for people, and particularly it's an eye-opener for young people themselves. We did a few sessions in some schools over the last few years where it's been quite a fun day, and we've gone in and we've got them to draw a picture of a typical sex offender, and you can well imagine the sort of pictures that we get, but it is normally your kind of, you know, older, dishevelled guy in a rain mac, perving over young girls, but actually at the end of that, you know, when we get through the laughter and we show the pictures that everybody's drawn and we talk them through, what we actually say, and sometimes we even say what we should be doing, is actually holding a mirror up and saying, well, actually guys, this is what a sex offender often looks like, because it's actually you guys committing these offences against each other, and again, that's often quite an eye-opener for young people as well as everybody else. as I said, this is the continuum of behaviour by Hackett. And we're moving from normal, inappropriate, problematic, abusive and violent behaviour. When we look at the kind of top end of this, I think when we look at that kind of abusive and violent and maybe even some of the problematic stuff, I think they're quite clear. I think it's quite easy to kind of look at those and look at behaviours that are coming through and say, yeah, actually that's an abusive behaviour and that's a violent behaviour. And I think, as I say, if you look at the descriptions on there, I think they're quite easy to do. What is not as easy is maybe some of those lower end ones, the normal, the inappropriate, and maybe going into the problematic. And I think some of the reasoning for that is about being really clear what is normal and what is inappropriate, and it's about having a good understanding of what is developmentally expected. That age and stage of development of a young person, what would we expect to see sexually in their development and in their behaviours. So it's really important, I think, that we get a good idea of what that is and how that then develops into inappropriate. So if it's normal, for instance, we know that, little boys age 4 or 5 are quite keen to touch and play with their willies, and they will often, we'll often see them with their hands down their shorts, and you always hearing mum saying, get your hand out of your trousers. And actually that is quite normal behaviour. That's a very normal aspect. But when would that become inappropriate? So what we might say is that if we can see young people of that age that are mimicking masturbation, then we would be looking at that as being quite inappropriate behaviour, and we'll be starting to ask the questions, whether it's in that, why maybe they'd be doing that. There may be reasons for it, and it could be a comforting thing, but we need to maybe start thinking about that then, and thinking about that as being more inappropriate behaviour than that kind of normal developmental thing that we would expect. Again, if we have a 14-year-old male who's masturbating, going into his bedroom, shutting his door, that's actually normally developmentally expected. But if he's doing that maybe in school during the day and coming out of lessons, as I've said previously, or if maybe he's doing it at home and he's leaving the door open so that his siblings can see him when they walk past, then we're going into inappropriate, and then we need to start thinking about that in terms of that being inappropriate behaviour. So it's very important that, as I say, we need to have a good, clear understanding of what is that kind of normal sexual development for young people. And again, I know that I think a lot of parents find it really, really difficult to think of their child as having a sexual development, but I think we need to be really, really clear about what that is. I think on the NSPCC there's quite a nice description, and it goes through kind of different age ranges, and it sort of indicates what we would maybe expect to be fairly normal sexual development at those particular stages. So that's often quite a good point. I often share that with parents as well, so that they can have a look at that and see, is this normal, or is it starting to go into that inappropriate behaviour. I think when we're talking about normal and inappropriate, we should be thinking about, obviously normal is okay. If we're talking about inappropriate, problematic, then that kind of range, we might be looking at maybe trying to support you guys in trying to do some educational work with these young people, to try and sort of help them forward and help them to recognise, what the behaviours that are concerning and why they're concerning and what we can do about it. And I think when we're going sort of problematic, abusive, violent, we'd be maybe looking at recommending that you fill in a full referral to ourselves, so that we can start thinking about maybe doing a full assessment or something on them. We use a tool which is called an AIM3 assessment tool, It's a strengths-based tool, but it gives us a really good and clear understanding of where the specific areas of concern lie with young people and where the work needs to be targeted. But again, we do that. We would have a team of assessors that are able to do that, and as I said, they're basically attached to the Youth Justice Service, so cases will be allocated to them and they'll be able to do that. What I will say is we've you know, our caseloads have become really high lately. Well, some areas do have a little bit of a backlog on these because we've had so many referrals come in, but that's one of the reasons why the consultation service has come into being, because actually often we find that we're able to give you advice and support and share some resources and actually, you know, be available to give that ongoing support in doing some work with the young people yourselves. Again, just wanted to go back to the concerns being put in a referral for say for us to do a consultation. I'd say, you know, if you're not sure, if you've got a slight niggle or a worry about a young person, or you're worried about a particular type of behaviour, please put a consultation form in. Like I said, we normally get to them really quickly. We do it on a Teams meeting. Sorry, I'm just skipping slides. We do it on Teams meetings, and again, it's about identifying if there needs to be any more significant support. But if there doesn't, then actually we can help you and we can support you into how to deliver the work and what type of work might be needed. As I said, it's, you know, it's all about looking at the strengths of a young person, and also I think it's about looking at your strengths as well. We know that, you know, when we do any kind of trauma-informed practice, we know that the big thing about that is that you need somebody who's able to build a really good positive relationship with the young person involved, and that particularly applies in these situations. And I think that often we can identify that, you know, you guys or somebody within your school, or maybe a social worker or an early help worker, has already done that hard work, has already managed to build a positive relationship with that young person. So actually they are by far the best person to actually be delivering some of this work and some of this education with the young people involved. And, you know, unless, as I say, we're talking about some of those really high-end worries and concerns and that really abusive types of behaviour, then actually we find that the work being delivered by somebody that they already have a really good trusting relationship with, and have a good honest relationship with, are the best people to be able to actually provide that support for them. So as I said, in all cases, please fill in a consultation form, come and speak to us about it. You know, we'll have a quick meeting. Meetings, you know, we time in for about 30 minutes to actually run through what the concerns are and make a decision about where we go from there with them. So please don't hesitate to come to us for that. Obviously, the standard safeguarding procedures absolutely apply. You know, you go through the MASH, and often the MASH will then sort of say to you to come to us as well. So often they will signpost you to us for a consultation. So yeah, that's the best way forward, I think. I would say in all cases, yeah, consultation, and then we can sort of discuss it and take it from there. And that's just the detail. It's just my name and my manager's name, who also does consultations as well, and that's the address to send all your consultations to, or any questions you can send to there directly. Okay.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. I know we've got a few people left on, but if anyone's got any quick questions that they want to ask Janet, please do. Oh, okay.
No.
Okay. Great. Thank you. And apologies for overrunning, but it is a big topic, and it's all of it is really interesting and really useful. So what I will do is I will pull all the slides together and the recording of the webinar, and then send that out to everybody. If for any reason you don't get it or I've missed you off, please just email me or email back into the inquiries inbox, and I'll resend it. But you should have it by early next week. Okay, but thanks very much for coming.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you very much indeed.